Hebrews chapter 9, verses 27 and 28. Just as people are destined to die once, and after that to face judgment, so Christ was sacrificed once to take away the sins of the many, and he will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. I must admit, the title of this sermon is probably one of the longest ones that I've ever come up with, and maybe there would be a better way of putting it, but the sermon title is Experience the Appearing of the Lord on the Earth. Basically, I want us to kind of take a look at when the Lord appears, especially whenever the Lord here appears on the earth. Because, around Christmas time, we focus a lot on the appearing or the birth of Jesus, right? But it is also a time to focus on the second appearing. And I think that is so important. And I want us to always kind of connect the two and to realize, yes, it was important the first time that he came. Yes, Jesus did so much whenever he came here on this earth the first time. But we know that he's coming back. And we know that that's a part of the story too. That's a very important part of the story. But just as much as we experience these different times of the appearing of the Lord, the first coming, or the second coming, there's also even kind of an Old Testament story about kind of the Lord appearing even before the birth of Jesus, or rather, us appearing before the Lord. You kind of have both of those in connection, and let's take a look at one of those together. In Psalm 122, notice the longing about being with the Lord. And this is a wonderful call to worship, to get us prepared. And what do we do whenever we gather together and worship? Well, in Psalm 122, beginning in verse 1, the psalmist writes, I rejoiced with those who said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. Our feet are standing in your gates, Jerusalem. Jerusalem is built like a city that is closely compacted together. That is where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord, to praise the name of the Lord according to the statute given to Israel. There stand the thrones for judgment, the thrones of the house of David. I know we're pausing right here in the middle of this psalm, but notice this this focus. Let us go to the house of the Lord. This focus on Jerusalem as well in verse 2. And to us we're like, okay, so Jerusalem, it's this city that's on the other side of the world, but to them, this was the capital city. I mean, the city where the temple was. That's why, here, the house of the Lord, right? Jerusalem was the place where the name of the Lord, Yod He Vav He in Hebrew, that was where the name of the Lord was going to be. This is where the house of the Lord is. And I think sometimes if we aren't careful, as we read Psalms like this, we don't always kind of realize the significance of what Jerusalem meant to them in the Old Testament. But it meant so much. And to us, we can still kind of see that in the New Testament, of course, there's this talk about the New Jerusalem, and there's talk about even how what Jesus was doing about bringing this rule, bringing this reign, right? I mean, you look at verse 5, and we see the thrones of the house of David are mentioned right there. Well, we know that eventually this leads, throughout the generations, it eventually leads to King Jesus, right? Because he is of the house of David, and he sits on that throne, and he is the king who reigns forever. He's the one who sat on that throne and still sits on that throne today. So as we read Psalms like this, let's make sure that we see it in light of what the New Testament reveals, but let's also respect it for what it was during the days that it was written. And let's learn from it about being in the presence of the Lord. I mean, can we rejoice with those people who say, let us go to the house of the Lord? They were so excited about it. Do we have that same type of excitement whenever we are in the presence of the Lord? Now, this passage I know doesn't have so much to do with the appearing of the Lord necessarily in our midst, but for us to appear before the Lord. So it kind of works both ways. So, I mean, does it really matter if we come before the Lord or if the Lord comes before us? I mean, this has everything to do with being in the presence of the Lord and respecting that presence of the Lord and praising the name of the Lord. The rest of the psalm continues. Verses 6 through 9 now. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you be secure. May there be peace within your walls and security within your citadels. For the sake of my family and friends, I will say, peace be within you. For the sake of the house of the Lord your God, I will seek your prosperity. This is a very interesting psalm, right? I mean, it says to pray for the peace of Jerusalem in verse 6. And The word Jerusalem, it even means the city of peace, but it has not oftentimes lived up to its name. But that was God's desire for that city where peace would rule, where peace would reign, where there should be peace. And in verse 9, we see once again about this talk of the house of the Lord your God. The house of the Lord is the temple. The house of the Lord is the Lord's presence. And that's where the, the reason for the peace of Jerusalem, the reason for Jerusalem being lifted up, is because that's where the house of the Lord our God is. And I will seek your prosperity. There's a lesson for us to learn about what the image of Jerusalem represents, how that is that representation of the house of the Lord, the Lord's presence. And next, let's turn now to the page of the New Testament. And like I said, we're around Christmas time, we oftentimes focus on the birth of Jesus, right? And I understand that, and that was an important time of his appearing. But I want us to see what Jesus himself said, because toward the end of his ministry in Matthew chapter 24, he spoke about his return. And notice the language that he spoke of there, or his second appearing, if you will. In Matthew 24, this passage sometimes is one that people are kind of, scared of, but honestly, I think it's a very important passage for us to understand. And it just so happens that one of my favorite characters from the Old Testament, Noah, is mentioned right here. There are so many lessons for us to learn from Noah. But in Matthew 24, beginning in verse 36, Jesus himself said, "But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. For in the days before the flood, people were eating and drinking, marrying, and given in marriage up to the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing about what would happen until the flood came and took them all away. That is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 men will be in a field, one will be taken, one will be left. 2 women will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken, the other left." And here in this passage, Jesus says that as it was in the days of Noah. Well, back in the days of Noah, in Genesis chapter 6, verse 7, you read that, so the Lord said, "I will wipe from the face of the earth." And he says later on, "For I regret that I have made them." And he's talking about humans. I mean, the Lord was regretting that he had made man because of that wickedness that they had had. That's what it was in verse 6 as well. I didn't read that, but we have, thankfully, verse 8. "But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord." So as it was in the day of Noah, it was not a very good time. But for Noah, the Lord still saw what he was doing. Everybody else was totally unaware of it, though, right? Kind of like this day, right? About that day or that hour, nobody knows. Nobody's really aware of it. Jesus even includes himself in that passage, which is, kind of interesting. But his point is only the Father knows. These are things of the Father. The Bible in numerous places, speaks about kind of the hidden thing or the secret things of God. Those are for the Lord. Well, I mean, could you really understand? Would you really want to know? Are you even capable of knowing some of these things that the Lord knows? Let the Lord's knowledge be the Lord's knowledge. You just respond to what has been revealed to you. And here, as in the days of Noah, Noah knew exactly what he needed to do to prepare for the flood, to prepare his life to be pleasing to the Lord, as did the rest of the world. But the rest of the world didn't listen. The rest of the world didn't pay attention. They just went on their lives as if nothing needed to change. And in verse 39, that is how it will be at the coming of the Son of Man. Whenever the Son of Man comes, whenever Jesus himself appears again, there will be a lot of people who are just caring about their lives, right? Who aren't giving it much concern. But as in the days of Noah, there will be some who find favor with the Lord. Now, hopefully it'll be more than just 8 people like in the days of Noah, but there will be a smaller group of people, that remnant of people, who are faithful to the Lord. So whenever the Son of Man returns, there will be some who listened. There will be some who found favor in the eyes of the Lord, just like Noah. But that is our goal, to strive to be among those who are going to, on that day, find favor with the Lord. That's why we get this therefore statement that Jesus follows up with. Verses 42 through 44. "Therefore keep watch, because you do not know on what day your Lord will come. But understand this: if the owner of the house had known at what time of night the thief was coming, he would have kept watch and would not have let his house be broken into. So you also must be ready, because the Son of Man will come at an hour when you do not expect him. In verse 42, we're told to keep watch. That's the important thing, right? The days of Noah, it was dark days, but it was time in which the faithful were saved. Well, what do we do about that? We keep watch, because we know the Son of Man is going to be coming, and it's going to be like in the days of Noah. And that's why we see that we're supposed to keep watch, because we know that the Lord will come. We have this promise. We don't know exactly what day, but we have this promise, and we know that he's going to be returning. And we know that it's going to be different than the first coming, right? That's what even the passage that we started off with from Hebrews, it spoke about how when the Lord came the first time, whenever he appeared among us and walked among us, he came to deal with sin. When he comes back, he's not doing with that again. He's bringing salvation. It's not, the focus is no longer going to be on sin, but it's going to be on salvation when the Son of Man returns. Therefore, as verse 44 says, you also must be ready. We don't know when he's going to come, but we need to be ready for whenever the Lord is going to come. Now, we know that, we currently are kind of living in an interesting time, right? And we have been for the past 2,000 years, that we're living between these appearings of Jesus. Because Jesus has already appeared the first time in the flesh, and he walked among us. And we know that he's going to appear at the second time. And because of that time in which we live, there are some things that we are called to do. In fact, several times in the New Testament, we are told that because we live between these appearings of the Lord, what does that mean about the type of people that we are called to be? Well, Paul addresses just that in Romans chapter 13, verses 11 through 14. Paul says, and do this, understanding the present time. Yeah, that time that we live in right now, right? The hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. The night is nearly over, the day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather, clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. So understanding this present time, interestingly enough, we're not really told to try to understand exactly whenever the Lord is going to come, because the Lord said, look, you don't know exactly the day or the hour. Only the Father knows whenever the Son of Man is coming. But what do we understand? We are called to understand the present time, the time that we are living in right now. Sometimes I hear people say that whenever they desire to follow the Lord, and maybe even after they're baptized, maybe they think about that time later, and that they maybe say, well, I wish I could have just, right at that moment after I had come up out of the water, I could have just died and been with the Lord right after I was baptized, right after I obeyed, the gospel and followed Jesus. But, what is stated here in this passage? I understand their idea. Sometimes they kind of think, oh, well, I'm the cleanest because I just had my sins washed away. I'm the cleanest I'm ever going to be. But what does the Bible actually say about it? Right here in verse 11, the end of it, it says, look, your salvation is nearer now than when we first believed. I know it sounds great, right? We have even songs that we sing about that line. But, what does that mean about our salvation being nearer now? Yes, okay, we see that, yes, we're closer now to the ultimate salvation and stuff than whenever we first believed. Okay, yes, but that's just how time works. Is that really all that Paul is talking about? Perhaps so, but does this really have a little bit more to do with how our salvation is something that it is this continual process of us following the Lord, being faithful to the Lord? Because your walk with the Lord, being in the presence of the Lord, being faithful to the Lord, it does not stop at baptism. It keeps going. Everything that drives our entire life should be about the belief that we have in following Jesus. Now is this time for us to focus on the light, for us to focus on the day. Look, wake up. Verse 11, in the middle of that. Wake up from your slumber. Why? Because salvation is nearer. Nearer now than it ever has been. And now we see that we're called to put on this armor of light. Yeah, okay, I think about it too, just like you do, about the full armor of God that Paul spoke about in another of his letters. But right here, he just calls it this armor of light. Let us behave, like verse 13 says, about this daytime, right? Because now is the time to focus on this light, time to focus on this day, because a new dawn has come, which Jesus himself has brought. And that's why in verse 14 of this passage, we are told right here to clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ. That is what we are called to do, to focus on Him, to focus on completely covering ourselves with Him, being faithful with Him as we follow Him into this new dawn, this day, this bright day of light that He has brought. And perhaps if we focus on the daytime and focus on this armor of light and following Jesus, then perhaps we will find that not only our lives are going to be brighter, but also the lives of those people around us. Because even Jesus also taught us to let our light shine before men. We'll see the Lord's presence, the Lord's appearing, brings this very thing about. Because a new day has dawned whenever Jesus Christ has come. And we know that our salvation is nearer now than whenever we first believed. Let's make sure that we hold on to that promise of that ultimate salvation, that complete salvation that will gather us not only through this life, but into the life that is to come. And all of these things come because of this appearing of the Lord, how the Lord has revealed himself in times past, and how the Lord has revealed himself through his Son Jesus, and how the Lord is one day going to appear again and make all things right in the world. This is our hope. This is our lives as we clothe ourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ.